All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the Sands of Time podcast. I'm your host, Tarek Ibrahim, and I'm here with our wonderful Mujir Muneeruddin. And Mujir, I'm feeling the fit. It's looking pretty good. You got a very nice, sophisticated look here today.
You know, a lot of the feedback that I've been getting from people is that I'm looking too much like a lawyer, so I decided to
I see.
dress it up a bit, go with the professorial Mr. Rogers look.
Yeah, you know what? We're calling you Professor today. So for this week, you will be Professor Mujir.
I'm okay with that.
So we got a great show today. And Mujir, the idea of the show today, you left something in my mind last week that is just basically bore a hole in my brain. And now it's just constantly in my mind. And you were talking about last week where the ulama, the scholarly figure of the government, would basically always keep in check the sultan or the caliph, that there was this executive branch, but it was a little bit more distant. They were not able to get as bought in by the government. They were just completely separate on their own. And then you just slightly percolated onto the coffee portion of it and said that this was banned at one point of time. And you went into it, how the coffee, this and that. And the whole time I'm just like, what do you mean coffee was banned in the Muslim time? Now, I've read books about coffee in Europe, and I was very happy to discuss that. But you pulled the rug from under me basically with that surprise that, you know, in the Muslim world, coffee was banned. And all my life, all my mind, we have these Arabica beans and coffees from Yemen, and we like completely owned it. So I'm just wondering, when on earth did we decide not to own it?
Yeah, no, that's a great topic. I hope we have enough time to go through all this. It's a great way to pick up from our discussion of last week about the mihna and the impact that it had on creating the rule of law within the Muslim civilization. And it got progressively more and more so as time, eras, and dynasties went on. The Abbasis, after the mihna, and I recommend everybody go back and watch that episode because it'll really set the table for the discussion we're having today. After the mihna in the early 9th century, al-Mutawakkil, al-Ma'mun, the Khalifa authority really went downhill. It wasn't just because of the mihna, but effectively because they tried policing morality and co-opting theology, they got into a standoff with the ulama that the ulama ultimately won. So Islamic political theory and the Shariah, as it pertains to that, really crystallized around this idea that the executive, the Khalif, was not a lawmaker. He was a law implementer and executor. He was an executive, and he was judged as to his legitimacy based on how he implemented the constitution, which was the Sharia. And who is the finder of the Sharia and the arbitrator of whether it's being followed is the ulama. So Professor Noah Feldman and so many legal historians have written about how this created this amazing checks and balances and ultimately the rule of law in the Islamic civilization of the medieval period, such that we had generally better outcomes and less Khalifal authority and overreach and less mad kings than anybody else in that same period. And it actually came to a head about 700-800 years after the Mihna, in the context of CoffeeGate of the 16th century. So where this all kind of came from was, let's say, late 15th century, a lot of the Yemeni Sufis who were all about Qiyamul Layl, staying up late at night and doing dhikr and Qiyamul Layl, tahajjud, late night prayers and vigils, they discovered that there's a hot beverage that you could drink that they called qahwa, that would really enhance your spiritual performance at night. So they started drinking this coffee, and it really juiced their ability to stay up, and they were loving it. Naturally speaking, though, given that most people aren't Sufis and spending their nights praying, other people started to find uses for that same substance. So in Mecca al-Mukarramah, you started to develop a coffee culture in the 1490s and 1500s where people were just starting to use coffee not to do tahajjud and qiyam al-layl, but to just hang out right outside the haram, basically partying. And so to the ulama and the authorities who were the Mamluks at the time, this looked really unruly. And we have a word for this in Urdu. It's called nahusat, based on the Arabic word nahas. Something that isn't necessarily a sin, but it's just socially undesirable and it's annoying. It's something your mom would be like, what are you doing? Stop that nahusat. Stop waking up 11 o'clock in the morning. Get up like a real man. It's nahusat.
Yeah.
That's the idea. And in this case, it's happening in Mecca al-Mukarramah. So the ulama are looking at this saying, what the heck is this? You shouldn't have this unruliness, this racket outside the haram. And they're being enabled by this new substance that ain't nobody ever heard of. And it's called qahwa, which in the medieval period was linked to alcohol. So right off the bat, the ulama are really distrustful of this weird substance that has come into the Muslim lore.
Now, if I may, I very briefly, because once you said that, I decided to explore my own avenues here. And I came upon this excerpt in time here where there was actually this, and similarly the same thing happened in Europe, where the people actually became a little bit, the ruling class started to become a little bit anxious, because now what you're happening is that since people were all gathering for this coffee, it forced people from all different social classes to gather.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you would have the poor meeting with the rich, with the advantageous, with the social excellence. And
exactly. So anytime you have an instrument that creates social upheaval or changes society and its DNA, rewires it in a way that the powerful, the aristocratic who benefit from the status quo of the order of society don't like or don't recognize, it makes them very uncomfortable. That is exactly the basis for CoffeeGate in the Islamic world too, because the Mamluks are actually in Cairo and they're Shafi'is, and so the ulama at the time, who are the ones giving them the fatwa and giving them the rulings and advising them, are more conservative on matters of fiqh and Shariah than maybe later scholars. So they're looking at this, they're saying, it's creating a unique culture that we don't recognize and like, we're not comfortable with outside the haram. Not only that, even the good that it's being used for is actually a bid'ah. It's an innovation. You're using a drug to juice your ability to pray tahajjud. We don't know what to make of that. And it is very similar to, people would say in the 1960s in the Arab world in India, there was a huge uproar about using the loudspeaker to project the adhan.
Right.
People thought that was a massive innovation that Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Sahabas never ever did. It was a problem. So you have all this happening in the late 15th century. It all comes to a head in 1511 when you've got there's a Mamluk governor of Mecca. His name is Khair Beg. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he outright bans coffee because of what's happening. And the ulama that are supporting him are more doing so on the basis of it looking like a innovation, a bid'ah, and their early observations of the effects that this drug has on people are that there are physical characteristics. So it kind of looks like drunkenness or intoxication. The name sounds like they're talking about alcohol. People are able to perform differently, but most importantly, they're more irritable. So there's actually negative things. When people are drinking coffee, you're getting all fidgety and they're saying, oh, this looks a bit like a drug. So they initially outlaw it. This is the Shafi'i ulama from Cairo, who are more conservative and they're more sensitive to matters that look like bid'ah than other scholars. But something interesting happens in 1517. Salim al-Awwal of the Ottomans conquers the Hijaz. And so the Ottomans are actually Hanafis. So all their ulama are a lot more empirical on some of these issues and more open to exploring new ways to do ibadah and stuff like that. So when Salim comes in, this infuses and ushers in this whole new Hanafi ideology and empirical retake on whether this ban against coffee in Mecca, which it then spreads to Cairo and other places, and other sultans and governors all over are trying to repress it. They don't like what's happening. You start having these discussions around it, and the Hanafi ulama are starting to test it, and they're saying, wait a second, sure, it does have physical characteristics that result from you taking it, but they're actually positive. People are more alert. They're not impaired. people, sure, they're a bit ornery, but you get that from dehydration, for example. There's so many biochemical things that can cause that as well. So overall, they start to say by the mid-16th century, Abu Suud Effendi, who was a Sheikh al-Islam in Istanbul, and there's also other major shuyukh, Abdul Qadir Jaziri, not to be confused with Abdul Qadir Jazairi, the 19th century military leader. This Abdul Qadir, the Sheikh, also conducts tests and experiments, and he says, no, this is not haram. There's no shar' basis upon which you can say this is not allowed. But what happens around that exact same time in the late 16th century, and this goes to show you that there's always some geopolitical trend that impacts the way we try and regulate behavior. It's always connected. In the late 16th century, 1566, Suleiman al-Qanuni, the Magnificent, the Great, one of the greatest sultans and Muslim rulers in history, he represents the high water mark of Ottoman civilization. He dies. Not only does he die, but because of palace intrigue and one of his wives, or his actual wife, Hurrem, her politicking within the court gets her son, Salim Athani, Salim the sot, Salim the blonde, Salim the drunkard, appointed as the successor. And he is not at all a good sultan or khalif. He's more given to hedonism. He has no real training. He didn't really take an interest under his dad to learning how to do it. Whereas the actual person that had trained well, Mustafa Pasha, was actually executed at the insistence and encouragement of Hurrem. She wanted her stepson to be killed in favor of her son. It's one of the dark spots in Ottoman history that's really sore. And they say Suleiman, this is a whole side note, but Suleiman, that was the greatest regret of his life. He, after executing him on charges of sedition and treason, they say he sat there holding his body for 3 days, just crying, not saying a word, because he knew that he had made a mistake, and he just didn't know what to do. That's his big mistake that he's going to have to live with. But it has major ramifications on Ottoman and Islamic civilization, because Salim, the sot, ushers in a major period of decline and rot. Part of this is because you just can't sustain Suleiman's cadence. It's just too high of a level. But things start to change almost immediately. Salim is horrible. And then you've got from 1570 to about 1630, very weak sultans that more and more decentralize power in favor of the janissaries, in favor of the ulama, and in favor of the women of the harem. The queen mothers and the wives and the concubines are starting to get very powerful. And you've got a string of very weak sultans that are taking over. And this, again, there's so many different milestones, but in 1595, you've got Mehmet, not the Great, Mehmed III comes in, and he actually executes, when he wins the throne, he fratricides 17 of his brothers in one night. So his son, Ahmed, is traumatized because one day he's playing with his ammus, the next day he's got nobody to play with. So he's traumatized by this. So when he takes over in 1603, he outlaws the practice of fratricide. He goes, from now on, none of my brothers are going to be killed, and no sultans are going to kill their brothers anymore. We did that for 150 years. It doesn't make sense anymore. I don't understand. What I'm going to do with my brothers, I'm going to lock them up in the palace. They're never going to have any public life. They're not going to have any public authority or role. They're just going to sit here, have a good time. And when I die, one of them will take over. But what happens with this is, in the old days, under the fratricidal system, you would actually have a contest for power. So you'd have the four Chalabis, the four princes would be appointed governors of different part of the empire. They would gain a following. The ulama would like them based on their performance in implementing the Shariah. The janissaries would like them based on how they did. They would have a record of how they ruled as a governor, and people would essentially get behind the one that they thought was the most worthy. So by the time that they took over a sultan, they were a seasoned, tested leader that has actually won the battle of Darwinism among their brothers. So they're actually fit to rule. Now you've got a person that's been living the good life for 20, 30 years while their brother rules. And now one day they wake up and congratulations, you were the Sultan. That's not good for anybody.
No experience, no clue what he's doing. Just all this power, all this
And
wealth.
who wants to go from being a playboy to having responsibility and doing your job? Nobody.
No way.
Right?
There's no way.
That's not even what they were raised at.
He already had the good life.
Exactly. So you fast forward to 1620, and Osman II, he's a young boy, he takes over, but he's pretty ambitious. He's called Osman the Young, Osman the Youthful. He tries reforming the Janissaries, who have entirely, utterly gotten out of control at this stage. And the mothers and the wives, everybody's just going crazy, and the Sultan himself really has no power. And meanwhile, the average everyday people are also sensing this, that the Sultan's a loser, he's a limp, we don't really care. And where these conversations are happening is at the taverns and the coffee shops late at night, because they can drink coffee and stay up until 3 a.m, just going out there and having conversations that the Sultan can't really monitor or understand. So it's creating this haven for rebellion. And then the Janissaries are being enabled by this public talk against the Sultan to replace him, or to really be emboldened. So in 1620, Osman the Young is killed by his Janissaries because he tries reforming them and taking back some of the power. So this is another massive turning point. So his younger brother, Murad IV, is a hard ass. He's seeing all this happening. He's a reader of history, and he wants to go back to his ancestor Suleiman the Magnificent's days, when there was discipline, there was order, there was honor, there was morality. So he thinks that things like coffee, which he's linking in with alcohol and all these other vices like tobacco, they should all be outlawed. They should be haram. The only problem is none of the ulama agree with him. Whether it was him, whether it was his mom, Kosam Hurrem, Sultan Sari, who ruled as a regent while he was 13 years old from 1620 to 1632. All these people, even the late 16th century sultans, they all didn't like these coffee houses. They all lumped them in with all these vices. They didn't like that it was creating this pathetic society given to Nahusat that was getting up 11 in the morning, and it was coinciding with this general decline in Ottoman production. So they're all linking them together. Every one of these rulers is trying to get the ulama to just tell people that this is haram. You can't drink coffee. And here's the beauty of rule of law. The ulama say, no, there's no shara, there's no textual basis, there's no Qur'an, there's no hadith, there's no usul upon which we can say this is haram. But interestingly, the ulama also understood, they didn't like the general culture that was prevailing, but look at the integrity. They said, we understand why you guys want to outlaw this. We don't like it either, but we can't compromise the integrity of the Shariah by introducing something that has no textual basis. That's going to have a very dangerous precedent. But we will not issue fatwas against you banning what is typically in the Shariah's jurisdiction. Because when you're looking to police morality and say that something is wrong, or that you shouldn't be drinking something, that's really the realm and the jurisdiction of the Sharia. The Asasi, the Sultani emirates typically have to do with public administration, matters of politics. They don't really get into morality, but this is more like a moral ban. So the ulama say, look, we're not going to challenge you on this. We could probably issue a fatwa saying that you're overreaching and that this isn't your jurisdiction as a Khalif. This is what I'm getting at with the rule of law. There's these conversations that are happening that are really showing you the balance of power and how it existed. So when Murad takes over as the Sultan from his mother, because he's of age at the age of 20, 1632, he's hell-bent on reforming society. And he's a hard ass. He wants to straighten things out. And he sees, as I mentioned, all these different vices as being the reason for the decline and the decadence in Ottoman society. In 1633, he gets a major shot in the arm when there's the great fire of Istanbul that breaks out, that burns down a big chunk of the city, and it's blamed on the embers in the coffee houses. So as soon as that happens, he feels that he has the pretext that he needs. He drags the ulama and everybody into his palace, and he goes, I need you guys right now to support me that this is haram. The ulama say, listen, our answer is not going to change. There's no textual basis to say it's haram. We're not going to oppose you and say that you shouldn't be issuing a ban. We understand why you're doing it, because these people shouldn't be hanging at 2, 3 in the morning. If you're using it for dhikr and for prayer and ibadah, that's fine. But this is not what we want from our society. So you do you. That's all good. He's furious. He goes, screw you guys. If you're not going to come along and give me a fatwa, I'm just going to go pass my own order. So he passes an Amr Sultani that bans, punishable by death, any coffee consumption, any alcohol, and other vices, which, by the way, goes way beyond the Shariah. The most the Shariah will say is if a ruler wants to implement the hudud, you can flog people. You flog people 80 times for public drunkenness. This is going way beyond that. No alim has ever said you can kill somebody for drinking something.
It's on the record that the Sultan was Murad IV was so galvanized by the evil of coffee that he ordered that if you drink coffee, you will be killed.
Yep. And there's anecdotal reports that he enforced that. He would walk the streets at night. If he saw somebody drinking coffee, they lost their head. There's at least some cases that may have been true. We're not really sure how much has been sensationalized. But initially, when the edict came down, it was punishable by death. I'm guessing people didn't want to necessarily risk that over coffee, or they probably drank it quietly under cover of darkness. But the historic parallel that I want to draw here is, in many ways, it mirrored what you saw in the Prohibition era, where you try and arbitrarily outlaw something that the people don't understand why you're outlawing it, and your reason for outlawing it doesn't concord with their social mores. In this case, the Sharia didn't outlaw it, didn't have the legitimacy to withstand the scrutiny of the public. It actually creates the opposite effect. A lot like the Mihna did the opposite effect of what was intended to, because it didn't have the legitimacy. Coffee consumption just got stronger, and people just wanted to have more coffee. So Murad only rules for about 7 years. And he's trying to police these things. Just like the Prohibition, people aren't having it, but it's not happening in public. And come 1640, when he dies, his successor overturns the ban, and no sultan after him ever tries to pass another ban, because they know without a moral and a Sharia basis for banning what is otherwise a issue of morality, there's no basis upon which you can foot that kind of a ruling. So no sultan even goes there anymore. He doesn't try and overreach. And I want to emphasize, this is not for the lack of sultans trying to get and co-opt the ulama into issuing fatwas. And look at the difference between Murad in 1633 and Ma'mun and the early Abbasis, when they tried beating up and torturing and executing sultan ulama because they wouldn't come along for the ride. By now, in 17th century, this duality of khulafa and sultans with the ulama is well crystallized now. It's well formed. And even Murad, being the badass that he is, knows better than to mess with the ulama. It's like, I'm really pissed that you guys aren't coming along, but there's not much I can do. I'm just going to go do my own thing, which isn't going to stand the test of time because you're not on board. But it just illustrates this motif that we've been trying to harp on and have been giving so many different anecdotes to support throughout history, that you actually had the rule of law, the law being the Sharia as the constitution, in the Mamluks, the late Abbasis. Now you have it under the Ottomans, and it stood the test of time, and it withstood so many different tests, including CoffeeGate.
Yeah, and what's even more amazing, so that's incredible, because you come from a time when all the scholars were getting beat up, previously. They were holding on to their beliefs.
Yeah.
And now you're going to a time when the scholars are, in a sense, invincible. You can't touch them anymore.
Yeah.
So this creates such a great place for rule. You know what I mean? That now there's real checks and real balances.
Yeah.
But I'll go one step further with you, just for fun.
Yeah.
And say that a couple of years after that, within 20 years, coffee makes its way to Europe.
Yeah.
And when coffee makes its way to Europe, the exact same scenario happens.
Yeah.
But it's different in Europe, right? Because in Europe, the common drink was always alcohol. That's what they always drink. So they're all drunkards, right?
Yeah.
They're drunk all day, every day, and they can't drink water,
Yeah.
right? The water was no good. So you have to drink this alcohol. So here comes coffee, and then suddenly all of Europe is no longer drunk. And it's interesting that this is a time when the sultans become weak, the caliphs become weak, Islam starts to go on this downhill, and it's almost as if coffee, this Muslim drink, and a bit of mysticism, is what inspired Europe to go out of there, because now they're not drunk anymore.
Yeah.
Now they can think. And again, the same thing happens, that the classes start mixing.
Yeah.
And people start drinking in the back alleys because the king bans it. All the same things happen.
Yeah.
Until the Pope himself allows it to be okay.
Yeah.
And the Pope is on record, and you guys can look this up because it's actually mind-boggling. The Pope literally says, I'm so fed up, and I'm paraphrasing here. The Pope was like, okay, let me taste this thing, this devil drink. And that's what they would always call it. This is a devil's drink, this black devil's drink. So we're going to drink this devil's drink, and it is too good to leave to those, what did they call, what's the translation of kafir in English?
Infidels.
This is too good for those infidels to have for themselves. We're going to keep it. And on that basis, they stopped banning alcohol because the Pope loved it so much.
You mean as in coffee?
As coffee,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Coffee. Literally, that's what, until then it was banned. The English wanted to ban it because they were just so nervous of the revolution. There was a previous revolution with Charles I.
Yeah.
So they got really nervous with that. So like, well, whatever keeps these people awake and alert, we need to nullify it. Bring back the ale. And then they even started making taxes. So even the king of France, I think.
Yeah.
He even says, okay, you have to be patriotic and drink alcohol.
Yeah.
Stop drinking this coffee.
Yeah.
So coffee was a whole thing for the whole world.
Yeah. No, and you actually hit on an important point too, is coffee initially in the taverns or in the coffee houses, a lot of its political opposition also came from economics and the fact that it wasn't being taxed the same way that taverns and different drinks that people were drinking in Cairo in the 16th century and in Mecca and Medina were. So there's always economics involved somehow.
There absolutely was.
So you definitely had people trying to tax it and make money off it. But the reason why the sultans couldn't ultimately see it, initially at least, as a good revenue base is because once you regulate it, you're still going to have those people 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, meeting at these coffee houses, reciting anti-sultan poetry. Oh, Osman, the idiot, he does this, he does that. And the Janissaries feed off that. And it just creates this sedition that the sultans just can't have. So they try going the moral route. But to Muslims throughout history, in this medieval period, if the ulama were not agreeing, and if you didn't have a Islamic Shariah basis for a moral edict or some sort of an injunction, it's just not going to last.
Yeah. And that's actually a great point to end it on, because I think now in our modern day, if I can fast forward to 2025, it's all mixed up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even though they're separate branches, you do me a favor, I do you a favor, and the law gets passed, right? You see, there's meant to be scrutiny. Like at the end of the day, even in this modern day, the people's will is what's supposed to be governed. And yet you see this giant disparity in what the people want versus what the government's giving them. And there doesn't seem to be any checks and balances anymore.
I mean,
to an extent. Listen, it's quite an exaggeration.
You could say that about the 16th century, right? If Murad is going out and he sees you drinking coffee 2:30 in the morning, he's going to kill you, and he doesn't have to take you before a judge. Your family can sue him after the fact for having killed you unjustly, but there's always give and take. Every system has some sort of slack and imperfections. So you can say that about any system. I think generally speaking, the U.S. system, the Canadian system, there are checks and balances. Nothing's perfect. You're always going to have push and pull, some tug of war between the different organs.
I admire the fact that that branch was so much more protected. It seems like it was just a little bit farther away from the.
What I would say is they weren't corrupted, because the Sultan could have gone to them and said, "Hey, listen, I'll just give you guys money to pass the fatwa," which happens a lot more in today's world. But the ulama, they were independent, as we mentioned in a couple of episodes, including the I believe it was the one about the Mamluks, but we've discussed this before, where the ulama were actually, and the qadis, the judges, had their salaries paid for by an independent waqf that was based on income-generating properties and assets. So they had their salary just like a modern-day judge would, that made them entirely independent of the executive. And they weren't given to corruption and bribery by the executive.
Now let me ask you this. Have you ever stumbled upon where the scholars actually became corrupted? Did that ever exist where there was things that moved against what the Sultan wanted because they knew, like, was there any sort of corruption that existed at that time? Like, let's, we're trying to put a little bit of humanness into the world. At that or did they always maintain their own religious integrity?
You're always going to find outliers for sure. You're going to find cases early on in the Mihna period where you had scholars essentially even telling Imam Ahmad, who was the sole standout that turned the tide, you had a lot of people going to him saying, just accept the Mu'tazili theology and repent later. And he just wasn't going to have that. You always have people that are going to fall for it. You always have people that are going to buckle at the knees. Every system has its outliers. Even in today's system here in Canada, it's generally a good functioning system. The American system's good functioning system, but you've got corruption. You've got people that are outliers. The point isn't that you're ever going to have a system devoid of any outliers. The point is, generally speaking, the system creates the outcomes that you would expect or that you would want. So there may have been some fake ulama in 1640 that Murad got on his payroll to say, yeah, but the people didn't accept it because they knew the Dar al-Qada or the Shaykh al-Islam, the Effendi, wasn't agreeing with the
so eventually it'll be sifted out.
Well, that's exactly what happened. So the fatwa never passed, so he had no juristic basis upon which to base the ban. So the moment the madness of Murad IV was gone, the next Sultan was like, yeah, we're going to dial that back. That was a stupid idea, and it's never going to last anyway. And that's what happened.
I think it's amazing. So you hear it here, guys. So coffee is now permissible. You can drink it. You could sip on it. I have tea today.
Murad could not stop you from having your morning coffee.
That's right. Murad could not stop you from having your morning coffee. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this episode, please like, please subscribe, please comment. Please tell us what you think. How do you even like your coffee? We're willing to read these comments, and there'll be other episodes where we actually do end up reading your comments out loud and responding to them. So if you have a good creative comment, by all means, put it out there. But if not, we will see you again next time on the Sands of Time podcast.